All right, we are live today with this live edition of the New Warehouse podcast. And I'm very excited to talk about this topic today. I think that we are in an incredibly evolving landscape in the warehouse world, which is super exciting, but is also a little challenging for some of the operators, and to say the least, maybe with some of the stuff that we're going to talk about here today. But want to welcome everybody in. Thanks you for joining us, and definitely happy to have you come join us live. And we're looking forward to hearing some of your thoughts and your comments as well. So if at any point you have a question or is anything that you want to say from your perspective, feel free to drop that into the comments. We are streaming live on LinkedIn, YouTube, X, Instagram. So wherever you're tuning in from, be sure to leave that comment and we should be able to see it here. And we'll get our guest today, Brian Kirst, who's the Chief Operating Officer at SnapFulfill, to answer those questions and give us his thoughts as well. So the title of today's live podcast is WMS in Flux, Adapting to the Next Wave of Change. So when we look at the warehouse world, it's certainly evolving rapidly, as I said previously. And, it seems like every few months there's a new set of challenges. And I think this year in particular has been interesting with the changing trade things that are going on, which we've talked about previously a little bit. But operators kind of have to figure out how to navigate all this stuff. And whether it's from labor challenges, cybersecurity, an overwhelming amount of automation options, which is super cool, but also very difficult to pinpoint the right ones and navigate those, or anything else. I mean, the landscape is constantly shifting, and we're just getting into the meat of the year too, the peak season as well. But at the core of that, we need a system that can help us with that, right? So today we're going to talk a little bit about the WMS landscape in particular, that system, that acronym that we love in the warehouse, the warehouse management system, right? And how it's kind of evolving, and what the WMS, like the traditional WMS, we'll talk a little bit about, and how that's facing challenges now with all of these changes. But what does the future of WMS look like too? So Brian is going to be our expert today. And if you joined us a couple weeks ago, he joined us to help us make sure our systems are all good for peak season. And Brian has a unique perspective on the industry because he was an operator himself for many years, and a couple different 3PL operations, started his own 3PLs and exited, I think, twice, right?
Yeah.
Twice or three times? Twice, right?
Twice.
Yes. And then was a customer of SnapFulfill and is now working for SnapFulfill. So you can say he likes the product, I think. But Brian, it's great to welcome you back in here today. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely happy to get you on here. And I guess for people maybe that are not familiar with SnapFulfill or first time hearing this, why don't you just give us kind of a brief overview of what SnapFulfill is?
Yeah, so SnapFulfill is a cloud-based tier one WMS. Really, it's a point solution, so it really manages everything within the four walls. It's highly configurable, low code. Our differentiators are business and workflow rules engines, which we use to not only configure the system, but also scale the system. We give that capability to our customers if they so desire. So self-configuration is also a big driving value of SnapFulfill. I'm partial to 3PLs myself, being a former 3PL operator, and really that flexibility to scale and to onboard customers and accelerate your sales process is really helpful and attractive to 3PLs. But SnapFulfill is pretty agnostic where it's deployed. So we're in 3PLs, retail distribution, e-com, manufacturing. We're in all different environments because we can handle pretty much anything within the four walls with tier one functionality.
Yeah, absolutely. And that rules base definitely a value driver there, as we saw and learned as we visited HJI Supply Chain Solutions earlier this year with Brian to hear about their implementation. And they actually, I guess, if I think back on it, I mean, they were kind of dealing with some of these challenges, which is ultimately what led them to make the switch, right, from their previous WMS.
Yeah, in speaking with Shane Allgaier, their COO, during the evaluation process, all of the pain points and compelling events are a lot of the things we see affecting operations across the board. So from labor scarcity, lack of skilled labor,
Mm.
to automation, and not automation from the perspective of what automation or which is right for me, but I need to have automation on my roadmap, and I need to be prepared when I get there. And then really another important area is how the product is supported, and the
Mm.
partnership with the provider. Those are a lot of the compelling events that were happening for HJI as they're on this growth path. And so now that we're deployed in 3 sites, also deploying Snap Control, which is our multi-agent orchestration platform, to handle some of the automation that they're bringing on board. They have some young Heinrich AGVs that
Mm-hmm.
we are orchestrating, and they're now going through an implementation of goods to person automation solution, one of their
Oh, nice.
sites. Yeah, so we'll be working with that as well. So we're allowing them to continue that roadmap, and in some cases accelerate that roadmap, because our time to value, our speed to value, our ability to deploy with automation is usually about 20 days, and that's when we haven't seen the automation before. It could be faster if it's a partner that we're familiar with.
Oh wow, that's pretty quick, definitely. So very interesting there. So, so you touched on some of the challenges there in what you're saying, and one you mentioned is labor scarcity, right? And I think let's start with that challenge in the market, because this is something that I think, I mean, ever since the pandemic, really, I mean, this has been a hot topic for warehouse operators, because it's just been a challenge, right? And at during the pandemic, I was assistant plant manager, so I was running a facility, and man, I'll tell you, I felt it for sure, right?
Yep.
So I guess tell us, and now we're 5 years removed, right? I guess from that, but what are you seeing now in terms of like what is happening in the labor market for operators out there?
So there's a couple of things happening, right? First of all, the scarcity of the labor and of the skilled
Sure.
labor. There's a lot more warehouses, a lot more operations, and a lot less people for various reasons to work in those warehouses. So that drives up some costs. Retention becomes an issue, and really the ability to invest in the training of those employees, make sure that you're spending the time and effort on training valuable employees that are
Mm.
going to stay for a period of time. In addition to that, you have your peak surges, and those are becoming even more and more difficult to manage because of that
Right.
scarcity. It used to be easy to call up a staffing agency and pre-pandemic,
Mm.
yeah, give me 60 people today, 40 people tomorrow. It was just easy. I mean, most operations had a staffing company on site usually, and you
Mhm.
were flexing that labor sometimes intraday. And that's not the case anymore. And there's been some really nice technology to help support operations. Some of the great apps and sort of gig driven, employment that helps some operations staff up. But we're still seeing that labor scarcity, and specifically around skilled labor. When you
Mm.
look at then the where the networks of warehouses are building, right? We're trying to bring product closer to people. So you're going into areas that traditionally don't have a very robust labor market. So we're almost creating some of the problems we're trying to solve for. So as we push closer to areas where there might not have been warehousing before, we're seeing some challenges on finding skilled labor in that respect as well. So you're getting a lot of folks who've never worked in warehousing before, and then
Sure.
you start introducing software, technology, automation, and now that learning curve becomes even longer. So, some of the areas, when you talk about WMS,
Mhm.
that's usually the first piece of technology an operation puts in place, right?
Right.
They're coming off paper, but a good WMS is critical to any, whether you're a first party warehouse, a brand e-commerce warehouse, or a 3PL. Having a solid WMS is critical. it's a lot of people's first time with that type of automation. Most people are installing apps on their phone. They're not
Mm,
really customizing it. They're kind of taken through it in very easy steps. You pick it up very quickly. WMS is sort of one of those last areas where folks feel like they can go in, make a lot of changes to it,
mm,
customize it to meet their absolutely very specific need. And so what you find is it becomes, the more complexity you introduce into the WMS, the more difficult it is to train on it. So where the
mm.
WMSs are, and I'm always going to speak a little bit in bias, with bias to the snap fulfill.
Sure,
But
sure. It's on your shirt there, so you got
yeah,
to, you know.
I'm wearing it. I'm wearing the bias on my sleeve. They're being able to offer all of that complexity, but then deliver it to an operator in a simple way. That's critical, so that your training times aren't increased, and you're not training people on new processes. You're developing those processes, configuring those processes within the WMS, and their kind of work streams don't change much on their RF device or
Mm,
whatever automation they might be using. So we really focus on the user experience being simplified and intuitive, so that somebody can pick up a device, be trained very quickly, and start adding value to the operation, and then build their knowledge over time. If they're really good at picking, maybe they stay in picking for a while, or maybe you start
mhm.
to introduce them to adjacent functionality like cycle counting, some inventory management, things like that, so they build their skill set that way. But for the most part, with task driven systems and workflow driven systems, you're configuring all of those rules and all those processes. You're taking those SOPs and you're putting them into the system as rule sets. And then it's just delivering directed tasks to the operators. The operators are really just validating decisions that are made by the WMS. That's
Mm,
sort of where things have to, that's where you're going to get the maximum efficiencies out of your WMS, not only from the
sure.
system perspective, but the execution with the operator as well.
Mm. Yeah, very interesting, and very interesting point there too. And this is something I guess maybe I never really thought about directly, where you mentioned that warehouses are now getting closer to the consumer, right? And it's a pretty interesting thought because you would think that, okay, it's getting closer to the consumer, so it's getting to like a more densely populated area, right? But you have a great point that, like, well, there hasn't been warehousing there before, so even though maybe there's more people around, right, there's probably not as many people that are skilled within warehouse tasks, right? Or you're not going to find many reach truck drivers around in that area, right? Or something like that. So that's a very interesting point there. But I wanted to talk a little bit about that user experience that you just mentioned. And I will say we just released a great podcast on Monday with Jason Marin from ID Logistics. And that was a huge topic of our discussion, and how he looks at that from a continuous improvement and engineering perspective. But, if we look at, the WMS landscape specifically, right? Like, I think back to the beginning of my career in warehousing, right? And the user experience menu situation, from big name WMS, right? It was pretty clunky, and was not like something that we would be used to in our consumer lives, even back then, or like today, right, in our personal life. So tell us a little bit about, how does, because at HJI, right? I mean, they had a pretty big name WMS legacy kind of player that they switched from. So, tell us a little bit about, like, how does that user experience? I mean, how is that kind of maybe dating like the old typical WMS legacy player, and having favor for like a newer, more advanced, more intuitive type of design, like you're offering?
Yeah. So we've been very deliberate with Snap Fulfill to lay the system out in an intuitive way. So from the RF device to the UI, it's very easy for an operator to find information or data that they're looking for.
Mm,
All of the screens are laid out almost identically. So you always start out in a summary view. It's an exportable table that can go right into Excel. From there, you go into a level of detail that's a more higher level view of one specific piece of data. And so as you go to the right across the top of the screen, you're drilling down into more and more detail on first, the type of information you're looking at, whether it be inbound shipments, outbound shipments, inventory, cycle counts, they all have the same look and feel. So you know where you start and where you need to go from there. So it's a look and feel that is extremely intuitive. Similarly, on the RF device, when a user logs in, they're immediately being directed where to go, what to do. Go to this area, pick up this tote, or scan this inbound receipt to start that workflow. We used to train temps, bring them into our operations. We used to say for our temp agency, they would say, how long do they need to train? And we would say, well, it's 15 minutes door to floor. So we could bring an operator in, train them on the RF device, give them a bit of a lay of the land of the warehouse, how it's, organized, and they can start picking usually within 15, 20 minutes of arriving. They just need to understand the locations. So we can get folks adding value to the operation very quickly. And that's critical. So we've been very focused on the UI. We actually released a new UI this year. I think we spoke earlier in the year about that.
Sure. Yeah.
And we took a deeper look at, okay, we're offering this intuitive view, but what's the next level? And that's really taking those views and making them customizable, not for the whole site, but specific to each user. So each user is still in that same view, but now they can modify those tables to meet their specific need. They can drag and drop columns. They could hide specific columns. They could pin columns so that they're seeing the information that's meaningful to them, and it's only tied to their user profile. So some of that experience, we now want to make it focused even more to a specific user, and we do that even on the RF devices with languages, and if you need multi-language, you could set a language at the user level so that the user's seeing the language that they're comfortable with when they log into the device. Similarly on the UI, if so desired.
So long gone are the days of function buttons, right? Is that what I'm hearing here? Definitely.
Yeah, and the request into support. Hey, I want to see this one column on my view, and then they say,
Sure.
we have to deploy a new build or something like that. It's something that the customers can control themselves, and that's a lot of what one of our areas of focus is really how much can we push to the customer so that they can really control their own destiny around not only configuration, but the data, the reporting, the visualizations, the BI. And that's really where, things, in software in general, that's where the push is, right? Users want to be able to kind of control their environment, understand their data, be able to use it, do their own reporting. Gone are the days where there's a few experts in Excel. Today, everybody knows Excel. They want to pull data out, dump it into Excel, do some quick analysis, and communicate back to their teams. And dashboards, they're not something for the boardroom. They're meaningful for everybody.
Sure.
So giving our warehouse employees and users the ability to create custom dashboards and custom dashboard views that are meaningful to them. These are the things that I think are going to continue to move along in the WMS space.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's such an important thing too. Like when you talked about, you go into this area where, traditionally maybe there was not like warehouse jobs available. So there's not really like that pool of people that have worked in warehouses previously. But also, like, if I think about, the next generation coming up too, right? I mean, that intuitiveness and that design becomes so important. And I'm curious your thoughts on, it's one thing to try and get the workers, right? But then it's like a whole nother thing to try and retain them as well, right? So how does that kind of quick, I guess, uptime from training and that easier to use type of system, I mean, how does that help with the stickiness of those new employees?
Yeah, when an employee feels like they can impact their own work streams as well as make an impact on the organization, they become more engaged. One of the things that was very attractive about SnapFulfill, and there's other WMSs that offer this as well, but having access to a sandbox from day one as part of the solution, that gave us the ability to not only test ideas that we had about the system, but for some of our operators to go in, look at areas of the system that they might not see in the live environment because they're gated, they don't have that access level, but build their knowledge. And we found that our most ambitious employees were the ones that use their their logins in the test environment. So
Sure.
being able to get exposed, because that curiosity, to your point, with the younger generation coming up, software is much more than just a tool in the warehouse. They live with software all the time, so they really want to look for ways to make their jobs easier, more interesting, more effective. So offering them the ability to test and look into that, and then some of the new tools that you're seeing come out in with Snap Fulfill and some others, are allowing folks to ask the right questions, get some answers, and really start to test the limits of what their solution can offer.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's such a great point because, to your point, I mean, they have grown up kind of just in a digital world at this point, right? And it's kind of, I imagine like some of my students that I teach, like, if I told them, oh, well, you got to hit, function button 6 to do an inventory lookup, they'd be like, what? Why isn't there just a button for inventory lookup, right?
They don't even want to they want to reduce the mouse clicks at this point, right?
Sure. Yeah, of course.
Part of our implementation is which clicks can go away and which pieces of the process can we automate so that we're removing steps. And it's some folks want more control and more steps in there and more validation. Others want to keep things moving forward, so they automate a lot of the stages within the process.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And anybody listening here too, I would love to hear some of your experiences with user experience and design as well. But as we look at the landscape, right, and certainly the labor scarcity has been a big catalyst for automation in the warehouse space as well, right? As people are trying to address this issue with either retaining labor or doing more with less labor availability. Certainly that has spurred kind of this innovation and robotics and automation coming into the supply chain space and the warehouse space in particular, to try and address some of those challenges. But addressing that challenge, also creates new challenges as well around these machines and things that are happening. So what are you kind of seeing, and what are you hearing too, I guess, from the operators themselves, where there's this large influx of automation solutions? I mean, we look at any particular type of task that is trying to be automated, there's multiple different vendors, right? That some of them look like they're doing the same exact thing. So like, what are operators feeling, and what are they seeing in terms of how to navigate this kind of vast array of options?
It's moving so fast. I mean, there is
Yeah.
some fatigue. It's exciting, obviously, but there is a little fatigue from operators, and really it gets to the point that it's a little bit of overload. So there's a little paralysis there. If folks do
Mhm.
want to make a choice, there's paralysis around. Am I going to make the right choice? Is it something that's going to scale, or am I going to miss the next? If I make a choice now, am I going to miss the next best thing, or the next new thing? So there is a little bit of that level of fatigue. Usually, the feedback, there's no one solution that's going to solve all of the problems, especially in the 3PL. First party brand, e-commerce warehouse, can deploy some automation that'll hold for a long period of time. 3PLs are a little more challenged. They need
Mhm.
that flexibility.
Sure.
They need some ability to scale, in case their commodity mix changes, their customer mix changes, or something happens if they build or deploy a piece of automation or some automation for a customer, and that customer doesn't have the longevity that they thought. They'll be stuck with some automation that might not work for other commodities in the warehouse. So making the right choice, and almost taking a step back sometimes and saying, yeah, automation is the catch all for
Yeah.
everything. But what makes sense? Do I need to be fully automated? Do I need a complete robotic ASRS system, or Can I get away with some pick to light and smart conveyor, or some pick to light and some AMR type of solutions? And then I would always also when talking to folks about automation, look at the labor that you have. Where are the actual challenges that you're seeing? Where are the true efficiency gains that you'll get? I mean, most WMSs will provide a high level of efficiency within the picking operation that, sure, putting in some automated picking will increase that a bit, but will you get the same gains as if you put in some autonomous forklifts or even AGVs? Because as you just said, forklift drivers are actually hard to come by.
Hot commodity.
And when I always call out when they don't show up,
that's painful.
It's painful. Yeah. So those areas of the warehouse where it might not increase, a ton of the same gains, and the automation providers might not be able to throw these big numbers at you. The impact on your operation might actually be greater. So looking to automate where it makes sense for the operation, where it's going to really provide a solution and remove a headache. Because if you have a great automated picking solution, but you can't get product to it because your drivers aren't showing up, do you really have a good picking solution?
Sure. Yeah.
So, that's, so really looking at the automation and seeing what level of automation is not only attainable for your organization, but makes sense for your total roadmap automation. And then the WMS. I mean, making sure that your WMS partner is involved in that conversation. Again, most of us in the industry have a bit of expertise, domain expertise. I like to think that's one of our other differentiators at SnapFulfill. Not only has the product and the organization been around a long time, a lot of the folks have applied knowledge. They've worked in the warehousing industry or the WMS space, like myself. So we've seen a lot, and we really stay well networked and up to date on the trends. So partner with your WMS provider, make sure they understand what your goals are. They may have some insight there, but also make sure that your WMS is going to integrate well with your automation, and it's not going to limit the efficiencies that you would get out of your automation. So again, our approach to that has been to just lean deeper into the warehouse operation with Snap Control, so that we're doing that orchestration with the automation. I think that's important that, as you're evaluating, if you're in the process of evaluating WMS providers, if they're not able to speak to automation in those first few selection calls, it should start to disqualify most, because automation is on most warehousing roadmaps at this point. Your WMS partner should be part of their dialogue as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And tell us a little bit about because we see, obviously, as we talked about, there's a plethora of like options for automation, right? And when you look at like different parts of your operation, it's not that. I wouldn't say, I mean, there's definitely the ability to use all the same vendor for all your automation, right? But in most cases, what I see is that, there's multiple different vendors under one roof, right? So when you're working with multiple different vendors from an automation perspective, what kind of challenges does that present from like a WMS and like an integration perspective?
Yeah, I think when you're working with multiple vendors, my suggestion is usually, unless you're going into a situation where this is the automation type that I want. I want AMRs. That's all I need. That's what I'm going for. I'm going to talk to every AMR provider. If you're more open to saying, hey, I want someone to come in and evaluate my process, show me where I can get the most effective and efficient automation deployment. I usually think that bringing in a third party, like the folks that we'll be seeing this soon at Element, those type of operators where they're integrators, they're going to give exposure to multiple types of automation conveyance. I think I think that's usually an effective way to go at it. If you're dealing with multiple providers, you just want to make sure they understand their role within your operation.
Mm,
That you don't end up with competing priorities. You clearly define who's responsible for what, from not only the deployment side but also the integration side. Who's owning that integration? What pieces? We're very clear with our partners, and then our customers when they bring partners to the table, what we need from the partners to effectively orchestrate through Snap Control. We go through a couple of days of discovery, exchange documentations. Then it's very clear who needs to do what, who needs to test what. And then, we're off and running. And that's everything from, a complex device like an ASRS down to some, simple light technologies and things like that.
mm.
Those can be very simple, a couple of days, but we apply the same approach to all of that. So I think if you're dealing with a lot of or multiple vendors coming in to deploy multiple solutions, really making sure they all understand their role and they're all working together, and it's well managed from a project management perspective, whether that's an internal resource within your operation, or you're using an external resource who's pulling this all together.
Gotcha. And then the WMS layer on top of all of that. I mean, how do you make sure that I guess when you're going to go down this road of automation, I mean, how do you make sure that your WMS is prepared to be able to go on the journey with you, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's where there's some. I mean, that's a bit of our differentiator, is that we feel we are, because of our
Mhm.
exposure in the space. The story there is we actually developed an AMR picking solution. Realized that the value of it was really in the software we created to
Oh,
orchestrate it.
I don't think I knew that you
Yeah,
guys actually developed your own AMR. Oh, interesting. Okay.
right. Yeah. So we prototyped it. It was at a couple of trade shows, and then
Okay.
we realized that Snap Control. There's plenty of AMR picking robots out
Sure.
there.
Yeah.
But there's not many orchestration platforms as effective as what we have. So we really just leaned into what we were good at, which is the software. So when it comes to a WMS, they need to know where their limits are, and they need to be transparent. Hey, you need to bring in a WCS, WES layer, and being very clear what data and what information has to pass between those to be effective, and that your WMS is at a level that it can provide that information. If the WMS has to start to do a lot of modification to get to that level, it may be worth taking a step back, talking to your partners, and possibly doing a bigger project around
Mm.
replacement, because making modifications like that and integrations, they start to get costly. So I think it becomes pretty clear in those initial conversations around automation. And a lot of WMSs have integration partners that they use to integrate automation. But again, it's all around how much time does that take, how much cost is there, and is there a lot of change that needs to happen within the WMS environment to accommodate that automation. Because of our highly configurable, task-driven system, we can create additional new stock movement types, or task types, transaction types. We can do a lot of that on the fly. That's not coding for us. That's really just
Mm.
configuration. Our customers can even do that if they're trained. So we're well positioned to talk to an automation provider when they say, this is the data we need, this is the data we're going to send back. We can create those endpoints and make it work.
Yeah. And we got our friend Drew here agreeing, being an agnostic system integrator to bring together multiple technologies is important, with the clap emoji. Okay, we like that,
Yeah,
definitely.
love it.
All right, so very interesting there, and on the labor and the automation front, and I wanted to touch too a little bit, because when we think about our, I guess the more we get dependent on technology, right, and I think at this point I mean, it's hard to function without it in a way, or at least function as effectively as we need to, due to changes in consumer expectation and behaviors and things of that nature, and just the way the world is overall, and what we expect as individuals, right? Thank you, Amazon, for giving us those high expectations, right? When we think about that, look at these WMSs, we see more and more software, more technology, more automation solutions like we talked about, right? But oftentimes the more, I guess, technologically advanced we get, right, we also open ourselves up a little bit to more susceptibility from a cybersecurity perspective. We just saw recently, right, with Jaguar and Range Rover going through this whole thing that they had over in the UK, which is huge impact to their supply chain. And now I think I just saw an article yesterday, the day before, about the impact to their suppliers as well, right? That were just held up basically. So huge kind of implications and ripple effects there. But and I'm curious too, as we've seen the WMS evolve from what was traditionally like, an on-prem type solution to now like so prevalent just being cloud-based solutions, right? I mean, what type of potential vulnerabilities or susceptibilities from a cybersecurity front should warehouse operators be cautious about or be looking for?
Yeah, I think cybersecurity is top of mind. If it's not, it should be for
Hmm.
most folks in the supply chain tech space, right? It has constantly been a target of ransomware attacks, and not unlike what happened with Jaguar. But we're so susceptible to things like the AWS outage last
For
week. So
sure. Yeah. Just
yeah,
happened. Yeah.
if anybody was hosting with AWS, they're likely impacted by that. So really understanding so if you're using a WMS, your WMS customer, really understanding your provider's architecture, who are they hosting with, what's the resilience there, because it's if they're taking a posture of we've eliminated all risk. I
Mm.
think just these scenarios you just highlighted, really we take the approach, it's not if, it's when. So
Mm.
we're always trying to stay ahead of what will happen, what are we going to do when it happens. So we work with our partners. Shout out to 1111, who is our hosting provider. We work with them to make sure that we have the right things in place so that we can recover and maintain that resiliency for our customers. I think it's a conversation that people should be having with their WMS provider, especially during peak season.
Mm.
The level of the threat level is going to increase as we get closer and closer to the end of the year, and it doesn't really level off much. Again, for supply chain specifically, we're seeing it more and more. There's a large retailer, M&S, over in the UK that was hit over the summer as well, and their operations were taken out for a couple of weeks. So it is top of mind for operators, and really it's a conversation that folks should be having. And then even the broader conversation, to your point, everything is pushing to the cloud. How can you create that resiliency, or how can you partner with your provider to create the required resiliency for your operation? It's not for everybody to look to get to a more detailed solution. A lot of folks use cloud providers. I know I did,
Sure.
because the cost of ownership is lower, and
Yeah.
all of that worry gets pushed to your partner. But we're seeing more and more, as I'm sure the other folks in the space are. We're getting cybersecurity reviews during selection process and RFPs. More and more, our technical team is participating in pre-sales calls or having audits with customers post-sales and post-go live. So we're seeing more interaction with those teams from our customer side, which is good. I think cybersecurity needs to continue to be an area of focus for
Yeah.
operators, especially in supply chain, and I would call that specifically 3PL, because you take out a 3PL and it's exponentially worse because you're impacting multiple
Yeah.
levels of customer down the line.
Yeah, absolutely. And I will say too, I mean, we mentioned some, big names obviously, but any size of company, I mean, is susceptible. Like I worked for a smaller kind of family owned business in the past, and we went through a ransomware situation, and the ransom was certainly not as high as some of the I'm sure, like, some of these larger companies were, but they, somehow got into our servers, and they held all our data and all our information, all the files that we had on shared folders and everything like that. And that was a huge challenge to try and navigate. Luckily, in that scenario, like the IT team was able to figure out how to go back and find a refresh to go from, instead of like having to pay off whoever it was. I don't even know if they ever could even figure it out, which is one of the challenges, right? To try and
Absolutely.
track these people down. So at any, at any size business, you are potentially susceptible here. So and you mentioned there that, as we head into peak season, the threat increases. I'm curious, like, why is that?
Well, it's more disruptive during peak, right? If you could take out
Oh, I
a
see. Okay.
network, yeah, and it's more valuable. So
Mm,
the phishing attempts will increase. We're extremely
mm,
vigilant on our side. We're constantly monitoring, training, reinforcing with our teams, because that's typically how folks get in. It's usually a very simple, someone falling for a real basic phishing attempt. That's the most common way of cause of a ransomware attack. So yeah, the threat level typically increases this time of year for supply chain and specifically in the 3PL space, especially larger networks of 3PL.
gotcha. Okay, understood. Definitely. So when we think about this, I mean, and you mentioned that this is being brought up more in conversations where people are looking at Snap Fulfill in particular. They're asking about the cybersecurity side. For somebody, because you mentioned, earlier that there's, people still out there on paper. I'll look straight in the camera. What are you doing? But there's still people, right, that are still going after the first WMS, right, or thinking about their first system, or maybe they're transitioning from another one, or they're evolving, whatever the case may be. What are the right questions to ask a WMS provider to make sure that you're covered, like you said, for these kind of issues?
Yeah, I think really asking questions around. So if you're looking at the cybersecurity, aspect of it, just asking questions around the hosting provider, who they're using, what's their disaster recovery
Mm,
process. It's usually a pretty easy conversation, especially if you're new to the software, new to cloud provider or cloud providers. It's a pretty easy conversation. If it's your first time coming into WMS and you want to look at functionality and cost and all of those things, I think some of the questions are really around asking who current customers are
mm,
and the size and the scale. So if you're on paper or you're graduating from a lower tier WMS and you want to come up to a tier one or much more robust WMS, there's probably some pain points that you don't want to repeat. So calling those out early in the process, asking if they've been seen before, ask for references.
mm,
References are always obviously a roll of the dice. Even us, we're going to put our best folks forward, but they do have real stories. They are using the system. They usually have how they went live to how they grew, stories to tell. I used to do references for Snap all the time, as you can imagine. But
sure. Still
because
doing it, huh?
I still do it away, right? But it really lends credibility that no salesperson can convey when
Mm,
they're speaking your language. They probably been in your shoes. So looking for those use cases that sort of parallel where you are in your WMS journey or operations journey are really going to help, because at the end of the day, WMS, the core competencies there and the core functionality of pick, pack, ship and inventory transfers, they're all there. It's when you start to get in
mhm,
those extended functionality. What does your business need? That's when you really want to understand, does the WMS provider offer everything I'm going to need today, and will it scale with my business as I go forward? And I think there's a few uniquely positioned to deal with that, where you can buy one WMS and have it for an extended period of time.
mm. Yeah, absolutely. And so if we look towards the future kind of WMS, right? I'm gonna challenge you here. I'll say, like, the WMS of the future. What does it look like? You can't say Snap Fulfill. But like what 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 features like should the WMS of the future have, and does the feature, I guess, do the features increase and expand, or does the WMS become more of an enabler of additional technologies?
Yeah, I think the WMS as we know it will start to evolve and be less of managing the system and the warehouse, and more managing the other aspects of the warehouse, all of the intelligence in the warehouse, for
Mm,
lack of a better word. I mean, we didn't even touch on AI, Kevin, and people probably give us a bit of. But I will say this: I think AI has been. Everybody knows it's out there,
sure.
and I think that I don't want the AI conversation, though, to drown out the automation conversation, because I think it's having the tendency to do that right now. I think our good automation partners out there are still doing some really good work outside of just AI, to continue to increase what robotics are able to do within the warehouse, what we can do with smart conveyance, and really removing some of the manual processes around packing and offloading containers. There's still a lot happening that has an AI
Mm,
component, but it's not purely AI. And I think, and I'm kind of glad we didn't focus too much on that. I'm seeing some nice comments around clear APIs, and I think
Send
that,
API, yeah.
yeah, integration is key, because you know, we did a market study earlier this year. You can find on our website. But one of the things that folks called out as a huge concern for warehouse operators was integration
Mm,
to external systems. But the WMS of the future, back to the question at hand, I think,
sure, yeah.
talking about embracing all of those technologies and really starting to be that platform that is managing the automation, the resources within the warehouse, whether it's an AMR or it's a person with an RF device. More and more warehousing and operations, they're not single site, they're multi-site. Being able to work between all of those sites, understanding the resiliency and the security that future warehousing is going to need, and those challenges. These are the areas I think the future of the WMS needs to really start to address, and we'll start to see that. I think in the sea of WMSs out there will be that killer whale that comes
Mm.
along and really starts to disrupt the ecosystem. So I'm looking forward to seeing what's coming in the next the next year or so.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely, and it's interesting you mentioned the killer whale there. So I'm curious, when you look at a lot of kind of the legacy WMS kind of players, right, who have been around for a long time. I mean, do you think because there's a ton, like as you said, there's a sea of WMSs, right? There's a ton of like startup WMSs that are coming out there too as well, and I feel like every week I'm hearing of some new WMS, right, that somebody's coming up with, and my question always is like, why? There's so many WMSs. Why are you making another one? But everybody has an interesting kind of perspective on it. So I'm curious, do you think that some of these legacy WMS players, I mean, are they really being challenged right now to be future looking as you're talking about?
I think they will struggle. I think there are some of my competitors who I really enjoy competing against in some of these deals, and you know who you are, and it's a tip of the hat, because we do some of these are really good competitive situations where we have to show our best qualities and really put
Mm,
it. They're not pricing exercises, or it's really functionality versus functionality, and ultimately who has the best solution for the customer. And those are great processes to go through. We learn a lot in those processes, and shout out to the customers who share post a deal, who the competitive angle was, because it's good for us to learn. I think I think the legacy providers are going to struggle. A lot of
mm,
their revenue comes from professional services. I think the mid market warehousing space is getting wise to that. They're also getting wise to best in class. So you want a best-in-class WMS. You want that integrated to a best-in-class TMS, and that integrated to best-in-class automation. You don't want one software provider to try and cram all of their preferred partners down your throat. You really want to have partners and solutions that fit your operation best, and you want that choice. And so, being able to integrate easily on your own terms if necessary. I think those are all areas that the legacy providers don't do well, and typically the support model. Call back to HJI, and one of their biggest struggles was they just couldn't get people to pick up the phone fast enough, and really engage in their growth. So they had a legacy WMS, and when I walked the floor the first time, they're picking off of paper. So to your point earlier,
yeah.
paper was out there, but even with a legacy provider, you don't find much paper at HJI these days, though. So I think the legacy providers are going to be extremely challenged. It took them a very long time to move, even just to adopt cloud. When you look at when the first cloud providers came out, SnapFulfill being one of them back in 2006, 2007, just in the past couple of years, you're getting some of those legacy providers to say, "Oh, we finally have a fully cloud-based solution." So,
sure.
It's interesting to see how that tide starts to turn as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's interesting too, because the operator themselves, right, especially like the mid-market that you talked about, has evolved from a technological perspective too, right? I mean, you talked about AI, right? And I hear more and more like very interesting things that like the operator is just figuring out how to do, whether it's through like, just automations that they've created through like, different automation platforms, like on their own, or just AI that they've utilized to tap into the WMS and create some like extension thing or some reporting or calls to like their clients on Slack or something like that. I mean, it's pretty interesting that, and I think that goes a little bit against like the old, like you said, kind of like, ooh, this is a customization, this is that, right? Like, type of idea.
Yeah, and it goes it speaks to what we were referencing earlier, which is the younger generation of folks. They won't tolerate a lack of that intelligence in the software.
Sure.
They're going to even the most basic, AI solutions, so that they can go in, ask questions of the software and get answers immediately. That curiosity that they have is only being enhanced by the availability of AI. They're able to get immediate answers to questions. So that, again, if you go back to the professional services model of these legacy providers, that's going to dwindle, because there's going to be a demand for instant answers and instant impact on process and on solutions. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's interesting to see kind of the evolution of all these technologies. And I mean, where I sit, is a very interesting position because I get to see it all, and it's very cool for me. But I'm certain for solution providers and operators, it's a little challenging to navigate as well too. So very interesting discussion with you here today, Brian, and insights from you, and really appreciate your perspectives on, not only coming from your operator experience, but also what you're seeing like from being a solution provider now as well. Now, if people, you mentioned the Element Logic trade show, we're going to be there together on November 13th here in New Jersey, where we both live. So that's like super exciting for me. So if people are around in New Jersey, come out. You can meet Brian there as well. I'll be there too. But if people want to connect with you or learn more about SnapFulfill, what's the best way to do that?
Definitely snapfulfill.com is the place to go. You can sign up and get a demo of the system there, but definitely connect with me on LinkedIn and look for SnapFulfill on LinkedIn as well. We have some great live streams and things that showcase our product, but not only that, some of our partners as well as some of our customers there as well. You could hear some stories of some real life happenings at Snap.
All right, awesome. And we will definitely put that in the show notes for anybody that's listening to this as a recording. But for those that joined us live here today, whichever platform you are watching from, we greatly appreciate it. And thank you for tuning in with us. We will be live again this Thursday. We're doing two this week, actually. And we will have a full panel of people, including Brian, from multiple different areas of the warehouse to talk about what warehouse technology trends we should be looking out for in 2026. And I think this one is going to be really interesting because we have Brian who's representing from software side, we have a packaging guy, we have somebody from automation robotics side, we have somebody that's doing augmented reality glasses as well. So it's going to be really interesting to kind of hear some of the technologies that are coming up and will be rolling out into 2026. And like we talked about here, there's so many to navigate. Let's talk about the ones that we should really be focused on for 2026 and what's relevant. So that will be on Thursday on this same channel here. But for today, I want to thank everybody for joining us and tuning in and participating in the comments as well. And especially thank you to Brian for being our guest and our expert today. So check out Snap Fulfill, connect with Brian on LinkedIn, and make sure you are following the new warehouse for all the latest content in the warehousing world.
Excellent. Thank you, Kevin. Appreciate it.